So good day, everyone. I am Carl Jason P. Shera, tasked to continue the reporting under validity, bias, fairness, and Chapter 6, validity, and this topic is entitled Test Fairness. So for our topic outline, first we will discuss or define fairness, definition from our reference book, and also I browsed the internet and found a good definition of fairness, and I included that in this report. Also, we'll tackle fairness in test use, the what does test developer strives for, enabled to have a fairness in test use, also for test user and the society. And also, we will tackle about the common misunderstanding of unlabeled unfair test, those misunderstanding of what people perceived as an unfair test. Let's proceed. So first, we will define fairness. So when talking about or with questions in regards or concerning the validity of a test, what comes up to our mind is that we question for the fairness of the test and encounter issues of bias and fairness. However, let us be reminded that these three, the validity, test bias, which I believe was discussed previously before my report, and fairness in test use are three separate issues, but it is possible for a valid test to be used fairly or unfairly. So, in contrast to questions of test bias, which may be thought of as technically complex statistical problems, issues of test fairness tend to be rooted more in thorny issues involving values. That is according to Halpern 2000. So according to our reference book, fairness is defined in a psychometric context as the extent to which a test is used in an impartial, just, and equitable way. So when we say impartial, just, and equitable way, it is with the absence of bias and free from any work of inequalities or discrimination. So apart from the definition from our reference book, like what I've said during the topic outline, that I browsed the internet and found a good definition of fairness in test use. So according to Professional Testing Incorporation 2020, first they defined fairness of an exam or test, or the fairness of an exam or test refers to its freedom from any kind of bias. What does this mean? So it just means that a fair test are not influenced or free of any kind of bias, either from the standardization of a test or the items of the test. Second, they also define that the exam or test should be appropriate for all qualified examinees, irrespective of race, religion, gender, or age. So a fair test should not discriminate any kind of participants, especially based on race, color, or culture. Lastly, they also define that the test should not disadvantage any examinee or group of examinees on any basis other than the examinee's lack of the knowledge and skills the test is intended to measure. So before we proceed, just a quick talk about history. So during the Cold War, the government of what was so called the Soviet Union used psychiatric tests to suppress political dissidents. People back then were imprisoned or institutionalized for verbalizing opposition to the government. This is just a scenario for us to depict that even from the past, unfairness in test use is very rampant. However, that is not just the main point of this slide. Rather, we would like to discover that nowadays, um, the test developer, even the test users, and even the society strives for fairness in test use. So this is the first one. For test developers, the test developer strives for fairness in test development process and in the test manual and usage guidelines. Test developers attempts to design construct or Test developers attempts to design, construct, or make tests as fair as possible. They are now being sensitive and careful in the standardization of tests and even in the items of the test. Next, let's move on for a test user. The test user strives for fairness in the way that the test is actually used. Test users are responsible of the test they use and the area of the test they use, or simply saying or just simply say knowing the purpose of a specific test and what it intends to measure. And lastly, the society strives for fairness in test use by means of legislation, judicial decisions, and administrative regulations. So, fairness as applied to test is a difficult and complicated subject. However, it is possible to discuss some rather common misunderstanding regarding what are sometimes perceived as unfair or even biased tests. So, first is that some tests have been labeled unfair because they discriminate among groups of people. When we encounter the verb discriminate here, it is used in the psychometric sense, meaning to show a statistically significant difference between individual or groups with respect to measurement. The great difference between this statistical scientific definition and other colloquial definitions must be firmly in mind in discussions of bias and fairness. So going back, this is a misunderstanding because although we believe that people are created equal and that people are capable of rising to the same heights given equal opportunity, thus believing to the notion that any differences found among groups of people on any psychological trait must be an artifact of an unfair or biased test. However, we can debunk this by saying that test is not inherently unfair or biased simply because it is a tool by which group differences are found. The use of the test data, like the use of any data, can be unfair. Another misunderstanding is that it is unfair to administer to a particular population a standardized test that did not include members of that population in the standardization sample. We would like to debunk this by saying that even though there is no member of a particular group were included in the standardization sample, does not in itself invalidate the test for use with that group. A final source of misunderstanding is the complex problem of remedying situations where bias or unfair test usage has been found to occur. This source of misunderstanding could possibly be in the area of selection of jobs, positions, and the like, and this will be discussed further by other reporter in the topic Everyday Psychometrics. So, to for the summary or to conclude our discussion, my report, our discussion of issues of test fairness and test bias may seem to have brought us far afield of the seemingly cut and dried, relatively non-emotional subject of test validity. However, the complex issues accompanying discussions of test validity, including issues of fairness and bias, must be wrestled by us all. For further consideration of the philosophical issues involved, we refer you to the solitude of your own thoughts and the reading of your own conscience. So, these are my references for this report. Thank you so much for listening and have a good day.